Welcome to People's Republic with Brianna Griffith. We bring you news and analysis from the front lines of the global struggle for social and economic justice. I'm your host, Brianna Griffith, and here's what's going down in your backyard and across the world. We are going to our other regular monthly segment. This is Texas Politics with Jacob Aronowitz, where we talk about kind of various political issues of both the municipalities, the counties, and the different regions of the Lone Star State. Jacob Aronowitz is an organizer with United Professional Organizers, as well as a member of Austin DSA. Thank you very much, Jacob, for coming back.
It's good to be with you, Brianna. Thanks for having me.
This week, one of the things I want to talk about is the attempt to recall many of the city council members here in Austin. Can you maybe talk about how this came to be and sort of what the political forces behind it are?
Certainly. So recently, a political action committee titled Our Town Austin filed paperwork a couple months back in October, essentially seeking to start a petition that could itself engender a recall election. So if enough people were to sign the petition, it was submitted and validated, there could be a recall election against 6 members of the Austin City Council, including the mayor, Steve Adler, Natasha Harper Madison of District 1, Sabino Renteria of District 3, Ann Kitchen in District 5, and Paige Ellis in District 8, as well as Kathy Tovo in District 9. The nexus of issues guiding Our Town Austin is the recent repeal of ordinances at the city level connected to basically decriminalizing homelessness. So that would mean the no camping ban that was amended to make it more permissive of people camping in public in certain public places in the city. The no sit no lie ordinance and another ordinance connected to the way that we criminalize homelessness in the country. A backdrop to this, or another recent development, is that the Supreme Court recently refused to issue certiorari to a case having to do with a Boise ordinance. So basically, the lower court had decided that the ordinances in Boise were unconstitutional. They had ordinances very similar to the ones that we had on the books in Austin. By refusing to grant the writ, they basically sort of let that ruling stand, meaning that presumptively, those ordinances are unconstitutional. At our local level, we recently repealed these, or we deeply amended the ordinances to remove their teeth, and then recently they kind of walked them back a little bit, but largely they're still in force. And it looks like that, they're like the ordinances as they were originally written were unconstitutional in the eyes of the court, or the court just defaulted to a lower court ruling that these Boise ordinances were unconstitutional. Also part of the background or on this issue is that Greg Abbott and the state government stepped in to say, that they deeply disapproved of Austin's decision. They started using state resources, including state police, to sweep camps on state property, particularly beneath underpasses. And, as the fallout against Abbott's cruelty bill, he essentially tried to save face with a slapdash solution in his view. It's no solution at all, but he directed resources toward a central encampment that's now known as Abbottville. The Texas Observer did excellent reporting on its lack of sanitation facilities and lack of other provisions that Abbott originally said would be available in the encampment. A lot of people directly interviewed said that it was a miserable experience, and it's a far cry from actually administering housing as a human right, something that would actually, address homelessness at its root. And then also part of the sort of political background of this is that Abbott is not, of course, the only prominent Republican to weigh in on this. Now, Donald Trump, the president, is getting involved with there's expected to be an executive order at the federal level or from the executive branch handed down on homelessness, which would direct resources to police departments to sweep and destroy homeless camps, and could potentially strip federal housing assistance grants and dollars to counties and cities that sort of refuse to toe the president's line on the criminalization of homelessness and his general and ruthless treatment of those people. So we have a lot of macro level right-wing forces really coming down hard on the city of Austin in the wake of these ordinance changes, other than the Supreme Court decision not to issue certiorari. So at the local level, the right-wing reaction to this, or that component, has been sort of typified by this recall effort to recall again Adler, Kitchen, Ellis, Tovo, Natasha Harper Madison, and Renteria. While major right-wing forces like the Downtown Alliance and the Chambers of Commerce appear to be vocal opponents of the ordinance changes and maybe, tangentially involved with Our Town Austin, the PAC that's attempting to do the recalls, it's unclear, I guess, exactly to the extent that the major sort of right-wing lobby groups are backing this. But based on their positioning on the ordinance repeal, it's something that they definitely tacitly support. And I think we should look to, news reports and coming out over the months that show the degree to which they're connected or supporting this effort. But that being said, unfortunately, this issue has shown that there is a sort of bipartisan axis, or there at least are some Democrats who basically are aligned with Abbott and Trump and the most reactionary local political formations. So there are some and some prominent right-wing Democrats who are also attacking the council, as well as the coalition of grassroots groups, activists, and directly affected people that actually pushed for and brought about the ordinance changes in the first place.
I think there's also, one of the things I always like to stress on this show is sort of the relation between electoral politics and other forms of organizing, where electoral politics is often kind of the most visible in terms of the quote unquote change we see. We see different people getting elected and whatnot. But in fact, much of the power to be able to bring about a substantial material change is more kind of vested in, especially with regard to people's, or with regard to change from below, with regard to change for the working class. A lot of that power has to come from having essentially a large kind of street presence and a large kind of maintained coalition that can be in the streets, that can provide, essentially for large protests or large sustained campaigns of one sort or another. Basically you need something to kind of back up your words. And I think that is part of what happened with Homes Not Handcuffs, where it was kind of put forward as an electoral change. We're going to go into power, or we're going to go in, we're going to vote on this, and we're going to make things slightly better for homeless people. But that, because it didn't have essentially that kind of backing of groups that could kind of take to the street and groups that could kind of organize for Know Your Rights campaigns. There was some of that for sure. I want to credit the people who are doing that. But largely it was kind of something that played out through Austin City Council. And so that then I think was its weakness to some degree, where different city council members came under this intense right-wing pressure from whether it's the kind of donors from the kind of Austin real estate interests and other business interests. And there was also a sustained campaign of violence against homeless people at that time by these kind of same right-wing forces. And to me, that kind of shows that, electorally, to get this through Austin City Council, or to get this through any city council, isn't enough by itself. You need to be thinking kind of, in multiple dimensions of this.
I think that at least now, especially as the federal and the state government crackdown and the the direct political fallout at the city level continues. I think that now in conversations that I've been in or that I've seen within the coalition, there's definitely an increasing emphasis and a lot of programming around going to unsheltered folks with resources, or to tell them about what's going on, prepare them for potential raids, basically tell them about their rights. So it might have been better if there was more of this base building ahead of time, or more of this direct outreach and service ahead of time. But, on the other hand, or interestingly enough, like the struggle of Homes Not Handcuffs within the city council framework has kind of acted as a clarion call around this issue. And then with the right-wing crackdown, that's sort of engendered, a sort of corresponding backlash to the backlash, if you will, where more and more people of increasingly diverse ideology, like an increasingly broad coalition, is sort of rising to the challenge to try to protect these folks, to try to provide them with resources, especially in the midst of winter. So that work is ongoing, and I think, like, in a way, it's almost been kind of energized by the Homes Not Handcuffs effort at council, and then the corresponding backlash. I mean, on the other hand, like, I think that you definitely have a point in terms of the ease with which these right-wing forces were able to force a partial rollback, which wasn't, a full rollback, and it's better than what we had. And then you've got the federal and the state government now cracking down really hard. Like, now there's state level sweeps that we're seeing. I mean, I was seeing pictures on social media yesterday where people were really, really upset that there were sweeps going on less than a week out from Christmas, for example. I think in the southern part of Austin is where I was seeing pictures, a good number of pictures coming out of.
There were sweeps along East Riverside in particular.
Yeah, that's right. You're right. I assume we saw some of the same coverage with the organizing that's going on. I think increasingly unsheltered folks are sort of having an increasing role in this. We've never seen. I mean, it's there've been a lot of interviews of those folks, or opportunities for them to make a statement. I do credit Homes Not Handcuffs for doing a good amount of direct outreach to them. The Texas Observer seems to be doing a good job of interviewing frontline communities and frontline affected people. But yeah, I mean, I think that on the other hand, it has been pretty overwhelming, the sort of mass reaction, or the response from Capitol and the state.
Yeah, and it certainly goes to sort of the power relations as well, with regard to these municipalities versus the state governments and whatnot. I think in our last couple minutes or so, we can sort of talk about where people can go for kind of more information. I know there is a page called Stop the Sweeps Austin. If you go to Facebook, the name there is the kind of handle is Stop Sweeps ATX. Again, the page is called Stop the Sweeps Austin. Where else is there that people can kind of go for more information kind of about this?
Homes Not Handcuffs also has a page. Let's see. Yeah, the handle is ATX Homes Not Handcuffs. So they also have a page, and they've been holding street forums every Saturday, which I think is kind of in line with maybe the modus that you were discussing, a more sort of base building or movement oriented kind of approach as backbone to the sustained opposition to the right wing backlash, along with lots of other activities. I know that they've been passing out winter wear and other supplies that are that would be important to the survival of unsheltered folks, and there's also, there's definitely an active subgroup committed to defending the rollback and defending against the recall elections of the 6 council members, including the mayor. But yeah, I think those 2 pages are kind of the hubs for action on this, and I really encourage people, to stand up for our local self-determination, and also the rights and the well-being and the dignity of some of the most vulnerable people in our city.
We're going to wrap it up for now. We were joined by Jacob Aronowitz, who is an organizer with United Professional Organizers, as well as a member of the Democratic Socialists of America, DSA. Thank you very much, Jacob, for coming on the show once again.
Oh, thanks for having me, Brianna.
And now it is time for kind of a deeper look into policing issues, especially as it plays out in Austin. There has been yet another scandal that sort of broke in late 2019. We're recording this at the end of 2019, and it will air in early January. The scandal regarding Austin police racism that appears to be systematic at every level, going all the way up to possibly implicate Police Chief Brian Manley himself, is certainly on a lot of people's minds. To talk about all this, we are joined by Chris Harris, once again, who's a local organizer around different police issues. Thank you very much, Chris, for coming back on the show.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Can you give us just a general rundown of what this latest scandal is? I've said for as long as I've had my show that that APD lurches from scandal to scandal, and that seems to become more true every few months or so.
It certainly has felt that way, at least for those of us that work on these topics consistently recently. Yeah, so with this particular issue, what we know about it, at least so far, is that basically an assistant police chief, which is, I believe there's 5 assistant chiefs underneath Chief Manley. So these are the brass of the police department, the highest ranking officers, and one of them, Assistant Chief Newsom, kind of retired abruptly now a couple months back, and under allegations that basically he's been, calling different people both in the police department and at City Hall, and even, then President Barack Obama, when he was in office, the N-word, and been doing this over, text message and potentially in person as well. And while these accusations thus far are just that, given the sort of his abrupt retirement, subsequent, semi-apology, and then obviously Chief Manley also kind of coming out with some various defenses of the timeline of who knew what and when about these comments and who he was talking to. It's quite clear that there's a there, and so a couple of weeks back now, City Council passed a really kind of landmark resolution to investigate not only the entire department for similar types of discrimination, both on any sort of official city communication channels, city issued cell phones, emails. They have an instant messaging sort of tool over there at the department, as well as on social media, similar to the Plainview project that looked at 9 or 10 different police departments across the country last year and found really kind of staggering percentage of current and retired officers had posted either racist, sexist, violent, xenophobic, anti-Muslim, types of posts. So, in addition to all that, then, the individual level, the resolution also looked at, is calling for kind of a broader look at just in general police interactions. So look really at systemic issues within the department that might be playing out, that really are playing out, we know, in how people are treated in the community in terms of who's stopped, who's searched, who's arrested, all of that. And obviously use of force. And then finally, there's a really in-depth look at the training academy and process. We've had reports from 10 cadets that left the 2017 class about a really kind of almost frat-like environment at the training academy, where even people who are trying to become police officers and are choosing to take this on as a career are appalled and leaving the academy because of a culture they say is broken, and some of them even came out to City Hall a couple of weeks ago during the meeting where they passed the resolution and said, basically that they weren't surprised that these issues went all the way up to the top of the force. And based on the culture that was allowed at the academy, it seems, very similar to what they experienced. So a big opportunity to really dive into the issues that are facing the department and how that's playing out for the community. And as well as to really hopefully give people an understanding of the extent to which, racism and discrimination, are still really intertwined with too much of policing, and again, why we need to look to alternative approaches to public safety in our community.
Yeah, I think that's an absolutely great setup. It's truly staggering in so many ways. Whenever I kind of tell people about what it is that APD has gone through, Austin Police Department, the number of kind of different things they found themselves implicated in. So some of the earlier data from a couple years back showed kind of those disparities in the policing outcomes with regard to discretionary arrests or whatnot. We've talked about that on the show before, where essentially the discretionary arrests were leading or were a large kind of way that racism was apparent kind of through the police department, and that they were when given the choice to arrest essentially a white person versus a black or brown person, they always found themselves kind of arresting the black and brown people and letting go white people for essentially the same level of crime, et cetera, et cetera. And so then we go from that to the scandal around the untested rape kits, where there were thousands of rape kits that were simply left to not be tested at all, to the point where they developed mold on them. So these people, these different survivors of rape who were looking for some sort of justice from APD, found nothing of the sort because their rape kits sat untested. You add that to the later APD scandal around rape kits, where essentially APD, not necessarily rape kits per se, but the rape cases, where APD had exceptionally cleared over 1,400 rape cases. And when I say exceptionally cleared, they were bragging about their numbers, which was just the staggering numbers of them, quote, claiming to have solved rapes. But it was done through essentially them padding their exceptional clearances, which is to say that they had a suspect, they had someone that they knew had committed the rape, and they simply chose not to prosecute for this or that reason, usually left mostly unspecified. And so we go from that. I'm missing a few, especially like different kind of individual police brutality cases and whatnot that also happened during this time. But here we are recording in 2019, going into the new year, where as we're talking about, Assistant Police Chief Justin Newsom had been discovered essentially calling everyone from Black City Council members, Black police, other people within the police department, and even Barack Obama. Not that it should matter who you call an N-word, but he was calling all these people an N-word. And it just like when I lay that out to people that this is what's gone on just within the past few years in APD, it's something staggering. And to me, like if any other organization to me operated in this way, if any other organization or company had gone through this many large scandals that implicated this many high level people within that organization would either, if it were a private company, would be bankrupt. If it were a social service or any other extension of the government, it would be shut down.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good summation of a lot of what's gone on in the last few years, and I think what all of that really speaks to, and that point that you made at the end really speaks to, is the extent to which the police and many in the community feel that the police are vital, right? That we literally we cannot function as a society without them, and so we are basically forced to put up with whatever comes through and out of that department, no matter how poorly it affects the community or speaks to leadership, the people at the department, whatever it is. And I think it's primarily based on fear, right? And we have both people in politics, political leaders, as well as obviously people in the departments themselves, and that's across the country, that really fear monger and people into believing that there is no alternative in any situation, and in fact, the only solution is just to add more and more police, to invest more and more in police. And that, if the only thing standing between, our society and complete and utter chaos is the police. And so, these things, while bad, are something you're just going to have to put up with. And the culture in general, while unfortunate to many of you, is a byproduct of what needs to happen in order for our cities to be safe. And I think there's really emerging a new framework that really challenges that notion and really is prioritizing, one, what are issues that are currently criminalized? What are things in our society that currently are a crime where we send police to execute coercion as a response, where that's actually not the right response at all. And we don't actually need a coercive force to respond to it at all. And then two, what are things where we need a response clearly? This is an issue. This disrupts either the social order or causes harm to people in our community. And is there a better response than police? What could the response be that doesn't involve someone with a gun and a lot of unaccountable power to use force, detention, and arrest as the way to go? And so I think we're slowly but surely seeing some of these alternatives take hold and seeing some of these areas where we've previously criminalized that behavior, said that it can only be responded to with handcuffs and jail bars, and said, hey, actually, what if we didn't do that at all? What if we let that go? And what would happen? What would actually be the result? So we're seeing movements around the country, and obviously we saw here and back in the summer an effort to decriminalize homelessness, to understand that while homelessness does require a response, the police are not the right one. In fact, policing is only going to make homelessness worse, especially if that's the primary response, because it's going to set people back who are homeless. It's going to give them tickets. It's going to give them arrest records. It's going to make it to where they're going to have trouble finding housing and jobs going forward because of their involvement in the criminal justice system. And we see in campaigns for different prosecutorial roles around the country now, people actively campaigning on decriminalizing things from, all sorts of drug use, even up to drug sales of a certain amount, and sex work. We're starting to see people have that conversation of, wow, okay, these things that the police, we thought, this is a social ill that needs to be corrected, and our best response is to send the police there and potentially put folks in jail. We're seeing now a movement to say, wow, let's roll back those things. Let's not respond with police and say, actually, this is not a criminal matter at all, and take this off the police's plate. Limit the scope of policing, limit what they're actually asked to do, so that we can also start to say, well, how many police do we really need? And can we start to, divest from the police as well as part of that effort? And then we see it also in efforts to, again, come up with alternatives. And, this year in the Austin City Council budget, there was money put forward to really kickstart a mental health first response program. And this is an area of maybe the greatest need, as we see use of force, and particularly deadly force, used overwhelmingly against folks that are going through a mental health crisis or have a mental health issue. And so to the extent possible, sending folks with a specialty, a professional specialty in mental health treatment and mental health response to those scenes, to those calls, can, one, save lives, but also result in much better outcomes for the people in crisis because they're just more likely to get the help that they need and get it quickly. And so through these efforts, we're really able to start to pull things away from the police department scope, reduce the scope of what's needed for police, and then again, to look at how many police do we have, and to challenge this notion of, we always have to add more police. We always have to invest more in policing. And I think there's, again, a growing movement around this around the country. And I think we're starting to see some of the potential successes here in Austin on that front as well.
Yeah, if you're just tuning in, you're listening to People's Republic with Brianna Griffith. People's Republic originates on KOLP 91.7 FM and is also broadcast on WHIV 102.3 FM New Orleans. We are available as a podcast wherever podcasts are podded. We are speaking with Chris Harris, who's an activist organizer here in Austin, about different police issues regarding not just Austin Police Department, but also just the question of sort of alternatives to policing, which I think is something that definitely needs to be added to the conversation more. It seems to be, for what should be very obvious reasons, it's a kind of third rail in kind of American politics. When we talk about policing, even those who a lot of those who consider themselves to be liberal reformist types, their solution is always like, you know, in response to, for instance, the Black Lives Matter movement some years back, the response to that was, oh, we need community policing, which was a line that came directly out of police departments themselves, is community policing line. And it essentially means nothing. It means more police largely in Black and brown neighborhoods. It means more money for police PR campaigns, but it's not a substantial change in the way police are sort of trained and paid and put forth and whatnot. And so, you know, even and sometimes especially in large quote unquote progressive cities like Austin, there's this even facing the kind of racism scandal, Austin, that we've seen baked into the training, that we've seen this racism scandal baked into like the very training of new cadets in the police academy. And yet there are some forces within quote unquote progressive Austin who are still reluctant to even shut down this academy until they can get at the root of what is going on there. I think that's very telling. And I think we do need to, you know, for all the kind of accusations that either police abolitionism or alternatives policing are always called utopian, we need to get at the root of what it is that's going on here. And we need to be advancing these options more so than just, I think, relying on sort of a quote unquote general status quo.
No, for sure. And I think you bring up a really good point about community policing because, you know, I think people often really focus on the individual side, and obviously the scandal that is currently gripping the department is very much an individual racism scandal, right? We know about this person who, you know, allegedly has made these comments about these people, and and the question is how many other folks in the department share those same views, harbor those same views, and obviously that has huge, awful consequences, right? Like for people on the ground, you know, if you encounter a patrol officer with those views, like if you're a Black or brown or any sort of racial, ethnic or religious minority, like what kind of experience are you likely to have with that officer? So it's huge. And then obviously even for people in the department, right? There's a lot of people of color that are police. You now find out there is someone making these sort of remarks about you who's in leadership. What is your chance of any sort of career in that department, in that field, knowing that those sort of folks can climb up to the top? And then, but I do want to also stress the systemic issue, because I think this individual racism scandal points to a systemic issue. One being that, how can someone with those views, assuming anyone else in the police department knew, climb to that rank, right? There's obviously a systemic problem that allows that to happen. But then also, what to me ultimately, really kills the notion of community policing is one, the idea that these folks that might harbor these views are allowed into the force, allowed to climb the rank, are now supposed to execute this community policing program. But even more than that, it's the mission of police in general, right? That ultimately is antithetical to the whole notion of community policing. A lot of folks, really lionize, and I love the series myself, the show The Wire, right?
Oh yeah,
great show, right? And I believe it was season 3. Kind of the main, one of the main characters in that show is a kind of a rogue police captain, Bunny Colvin, who really he laments the days when he felt there was community policing and could police walk the beat and knew everybody, and I think a lot of people, I don't know many folks that actually know of that history, that know that was a thing and can speak from experience to having that experience. So I question a little bit the validity of that memory. But even he, at the end of the day, what he did was he changed the mission of his unit, which was to legalize all drugs, right? And I think this is ultimately what kills the notion of community policing. They have a racist mission, and that mission has been given to him by our legislators, our lawmakers, right? And some of them very, very, enthusiastically carry out that mission, but it is impossible to execute the drug war in an anti-racist way. The drug war itself is racist, right? Implemented by racist lawmakers, strengthened further by folks that ultimately don't get the connection ultimately between drugs and what drugs are legal, what drugs are illegal, sentencing, how we punish, and how the drug war is actually set up, and race. And it ultimately is a racist scheme meant to pull in Black, brown, immigrant folks. And so it is literally impossible to execute the drug war in an anti-racist way. And you can't have something like community policing while you're simultaneously enthusiastically carrying out the drug war. Like, it just cannot happen. And that goes for a lot of different laws. And I speak to the drug war because I think people have an understanding of that, in terms of the origins of why things like marijuana are legal, why, there was a discrepancy in so long in sentencing between things like crack and cocaine. There's, race is at the heart of that stuff. But it goes to many other laws in the books as well, laws that we can't even speak to. There was an analysis done by the main prosecutor group here in Texas, and it was something on the order of a few dozen new laws every session, right? Even when you count the ones that get subsumed or taken away, every legislative session, they're adding dozens of new laws. This last legislative session, they added 50 new laws, right? And what are those laws doing? Now, some of them might actually be tackling social ills in an appropriate way. But a lot of times there's something bad going on. We think that, we don't have the creativity to create the solution that's going to best fit the issue. So what we're going to do is take this thing that we already rely on, which is the police, the jails, the courts, and we're just going to expand their scope, and we're going to expand it more and more and more. And ultimately what that does is just wrap more and more people into this system. And it makes it that much harder to end this mass incarceration regime that, again, has led us to be have the most folks per capita in jail of any country, have the most intricate series of cages the world has ever known.
Yeah, no other country comes close to the number of people per capita, or I think it's just a raw number of people, right? No other country comes close, even countries with many times our population, to how many people it is we have locked up in jails and in prisons. And it's an expansion of the carceral state, and I think it always requires us to have this kind of deeper analysis. Like, we see the things pop up. We see, for instance, Trump's kind of a racist inflammation and sort of a rabid support of police and whatnot. Like, we see these different manifestations of, like, sort of the symptoms of the problem. We have to understand at kind of a deeper level, what is the problem to me? Like, always get at the root of how something came to be. And so one of the things I always point out when we talk about police is that the two roots of policing in the U.S. are union busting and essentially slave catching. That is, they would find slaves that were had escaped to freedom, and they would catch them and then imprison them and send them back into slavery, as well as kind of the union busting side of Pinkerton and whatnot, to keep essentially like poor urban workers kind of in their place. Those are the two essentially roots of policing, because when you look at what the state is, like, you have to understand at some level what the state is, how it forms, how it functions. And so, like, the state exists, every kind of form of a different government bureaucracy, every form of kind of leadership and whatnot, to some level exists to manage the class contradictions in a society. Because there are different contradictions within, for instance, the ruling class, and there are different contradictions within the different working classes and oppressed and exploited classes. And so the state emerges as this way to manage these contradictions in a way that holds the coherence of the system together. Well, when the gap between the ruling class and the working and exploited and oppressed classes grow, the state needs to grow along with it in order to have sort of a violent mechanism to keep those classes from upending the system in some drastic way. And so as long as that continues, as long as this massive economic inequality continues in the way it does, we're going to continue to see the expansion of police. And, to me, the less we can sort of normalize that expansion, the less we can sort of say, oh, this is just what we need to be because there's more quote unquote crime, the more we can kind of make that intervention. Because, I mean, you can look, for instance, at what happened in Bolivia just recently to see what role the police played in essentially allowing a white and actually enforcing a white supremacist military coup in that country. The police there played a huge role in that military coup, in that very right-wing actual white supremacist regime. in Bolivia, but bring it kind of back to more local issues and whatnot. There's also kind of the question of, what is crime, for instance, is the other side of that, because crime itself, even though the quote unquote crime rate actually is, I believe, has dropped significantly in recent decades, that's even including what you consider to be crime changing, essentially, where more, as you're saying, more things get criminalized every year. Like I'm thinking in particular of like the homeless, not the homeless question here, but the question around like sort of camping and whatnot here in Austin, where it's like even things that weren't a crime, such as camping on public property, have become criminalized. And what we've seen is this massive backlash even toward that, an actual violent backlash that led to essentially people aligned with the interests of big real estate here attacking homeless people, setting their tents on fire in sort of tandem, not necessarily in a formal way, but in an informal way with also what the police have been doing, what Texas DOT and other kind of state agencies have been doing to essentially like make homeless people's lives as hard as possible.
Yeah, no, I mean, and I think, it all comes back to your points there because, yeah, I mean, it is, police still are very much, tied to capital and protecting capital and generally the status quo of society. And again, and it grows as that tension grows. And I think, the issues around the response to sexual assault speak to that as well, right? Because I think there's an easy answer there, which is to say, wow, we should expand the police so that they can better test these kids and better solve these crimes. But if you think about it from the lens that they're actually here to help enforce the patriarchy, right? They actually, while you might have, and you do have some individual officers that are very, very much would like to solve these crimes and be helpful. You have a system ultimately that and this is not just in Austin. We've seen issues with case clearances and with the backlog, which is honestly a misnomer, but basically untested rape kits, intentionally untested rape kits for years in city after city after city. And that doesn't happen by accident. That happens because there's an intentional, really deprioritization of that issue on its own because of systemic and individual prejudices that get acted out through the police department as in their role as enforcement of these larger systems. And the patriarchy is very much one of them. Now, obviously, sexual assault can happen to many different types of folks, but we know that, by and large, it's something against self-identifying women. And that, again, is something that, is the police are just have not traditionally been interested in and capable of actually addressing in any real way. And I think, the issue around homelessness really gets to this as well. Yes, you have ultimately the business community really being the primary folks, particularly downtown. And obviously part of that speaks to this particular situation in Austin, such that, we have a lot of the homeless services and are really only, shelter or a couple of shelters of note currently there downtown. But it also speaks across the board. I mean, obviously there's also a drive by folks experiencing homelessness often to come to places where there's lots of pedestrian traffic. That's where they can find folks to ask for help more regularly. And so that often ends up being in downtown areas. But the business community is what gets city council to roll back a little bit, right, on the ordinances this summer. And luckily, we haven't seen, a big uptick in the tickets again. So it appears that the impact of that has been minimal, with the exception of the area around the Arch, which we can definitely talk some more about. But, and I think what you also see is many in the middle class who may actually have some inkling to be sympathetic towards people experiencing homelessness, share the class interests of the business community, and a large part of it being that their own financial future is now almost solely wrapped up, given the stock market, casino, and the collapses we've seen with that within their housing, right? So literally all things now go into protecting that investment, which for many folks is like their entire future. It's their potential to retire. It's everything. And so anything that threatens the value of that becomes a threat to them personally, their ability to retire, their ability to grow old. And so, for too many, that meant a willingness to jump on the board of dehumanizing folks, of not seeing actually that they share more interests with these folks. And they are, closer to being homeless than they are to ever identifying with these big interests, business interests downtown. And really to collectively come together and say, hey, actually, yeah, we want a community that has enough housing for everybody so that nobody's in this situation, so that if I have a health, catastrophe, and we've seen the disasters with our healthcare industry, or if I have a death in the family or whatever it is, that I'm not going to be subjected to the same system and potentially the same treatment. And so it's really frustrating, but ultimately it very much is the case that when we take a step back, that police too often serve the interests of capital, and again enforcing the kind of primary systems at play in our country. And I think there's a lot of truth to what you say about, really kind of as income inequality grows, we see kind of social ills and social disorder grow in certain ways, and rightfully so, because you have folks really unable to continue to operate as usual within the confines of this current system, and with this inequality that we have it. And the answer is then to always just put more police and other kind of state mechanisms in play. And so I think that's also why you see such a fear to even the potential of just keeping the force the same, much less reducing its size or reducing its number in any way. So I'm really, I guess, ultimately hopeful about our ability to continue to kind of chip away at the scope of what the police are set to deal with. And I think, honestly, even a lot of individual officers will tell you that they're asked to do too much, and they're not, they don't have these professional skills in these other areas, and it doesn't make sense that they're the ones to respond to things. And so to continue to chip away at that is definitely something that I think, makes a lot of sense. And when you explain it to people, and it's something that we're going to continue to be able to do, but it's always going to be a fight. And really, like any aspect of bureaucracy of the state, they always want to increase their size and their number every year. And the police are no different, but that applies to literally every department.
Yeah.
And the state government and the local government and the federal government. I mean, that's how they work. And there's systemic issues with that, reasons for that. There's also individual reasons for that, right? Like personal ambition. If I'm leading a department and it doesn't grow in size, it doesn't grow in scope, it doesn't grow in budget, what does that say about me? How am I going to climb the next rank in the ladder? How am I going to get to the next job? So, there's a lot of issues at play with that, but I do think that, getting to the income inequality issue, is really critical for so many of these things. When we talk about, homelessness, we're seeing, a huge new growth in the working homeless, right? Folks that actually have jobs. Last year, ECHO estimated 42% of people experiencing homelessness in Austin had a job, right? So, there's a lot of other issues that go into homelessness, but when someone's working and they still cannot afford a place to live in your community, that's a real problem. And it speaks to a whole host of other issues that have to be solved that policing cannot solve, right? And that we need the resources to go to. And unfortunately, what we see is not just in Austin, but in cities around the country, 40, 50, 60% of their budgets are taken up by policing. And so this is really one of the big reasons that, we really have to look there for cuts, for ways to pull back, to reduce the scope of what they're doing, and ultimately to reduce the number of them, because there's no other place to get the money, at least where we're currently getting money right now. Obviously, I think, different taxation regimes and stuff like that could obviously raise more revenue and help to support some of these other initiatives. But But it also, how much of that do we need because of the income inequality that we have, right? And would we actually even need all these government supports if we didn't have so much income inequality to start with?
Yeah, there are a lot of kind of points I'd like to build off there. One of which is, that question, I always point this out, that how are you going to pay for it is never raised with regard to police and military. It's always with the social services that are somehow redundant, and they're always having to justify themselves. How are you going to pay for social services? Especially when those don't come with any sort of stipulations on them. It's always how are you going to pay for it. But with regard to police, with regard to military, like it's always assumed that money is going to be there. I was talking to some people earlier today, some homeless people and some different organizers who were saying that essentially, like one person was saying that something like 75% of the Austin city budget goes to police and courts, different parts of that. I know it's at least something like 60% that's just generally like public, quote unquote, public safety related.
Yeah, that's right. You've got upwards of 2/3 plus going to public safety. That's right.
Yeah, just an absolutely absurd number for sure. We have maybe a few minutes left. Is there anything else that has sort of been on your radar with regard to either kind of local issues or kind of national police, national police news and policing in general? Anything else that's been on your radar? Anything else you'd like to leave us with?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think a couple things. One is that, there is a continuing need to stay engaged on the mental health first responder process and program. There's some money in the budget and a tentative plan laid out during budget season at the city level this year. But I think there's a real opportunity to make that the best thing it can be, and then to put in a position to continue to build and to grow. Again, we know that locally, many of the vast majority of police-involved shootings have involved people where they were in a mental health crisis or had some sort of mental health issue. And so to the extent that we can, reduce police involvement in responding to those incidents wherever possible and get folks who have, years and years of training, really a specialty in dealing with those types of incidents, that's going to be really important. Right now, I think there's a good plan in place, but again, I think continued public pressure on that is going to be real important. We've seen in communities like in Eugene, Oregon, and a few other communities up there with a program called Cahoots, that it is possible to eliminate basically police from the response in a large number of the calls and to have better outcomes on the back end of that. And so, and we're seeing now in bigger cities, efforts to move forward with programs like that. In Dallas, they still involve police in the response, though they now have mental health and EMS folks engaged as well, and they send fewer police than they did before. And they're seeing in their pilot program, huge. One, just better outcomes, but then also huge savings in emergency hospitalization prevention and things of that sort. So there's just a lot of potential benefits that come from that approach. The other main thing is on homelessness, which is, I think the city is currently attempting to make some strides in housing. They've purchased one motel, and it's looking likely that they'll purchase a few others to really improve the shelters, like increase shelter stock for the first time in many, many years in this community, which I think is an immediate outgrowth of the decriminalization effort, right? By virtue of making homelessness more visible, obviously it triggered a backlash that none of us really expected and was really unfortunate. And obviously the governor's involvement, it looks like now that Trump is also going to be announcing some sort of homelessness plan that he teased throughout the summer as well, which looks awful and very akin to the response that he and his administration have had to immigration, which is dehumanize other folks and then put them in cages.
I mean, it's a concentration camp system is what I see it as. Like it's putting homeless people and putting immigrants in concentration camps.
Yeah, and I think if you have some folks that would describe the camp that the governor has set up out in East Austin in similar terms. the meals are being provided, but the promised electricity, other social services are not there, have not been given. This was supposed to be a temporary thing. It now looks indefinite, and it's completely out of the city. And it's what I've been told, 3 bus transfers away from downtown, where again you have a lot of the homeless services and things. Again, you also have upwards of over 40% of people experiencing homelessness with a job, which obviously they don't have transportation typically in order to make that job, so they can't be out there. And so I think there's going to be continued right-wing efforts to criminalize, recriminalize homelessness both here and nationally. And we definitely need to stay engaged on that, and potentially a ballot measure that might come up in either May or November here locally to overturn the changes that were made last summer and completely recriminalize homelessness. And obviously, if that were to come up, then it will be an all hands on deck situation to ensure that doesn't happen, and that folks are able to obviously sleep where they need to sleep and do the unavoidable activities of life, and not be criminalized simply by virtue of not having a place to go.
Yeah, I think that's an absolutely a great place to leave it. We were joined by Chris Harris for this episode, who is an organizer around police accountability issues. Thank you very much, Chris, for coming back on the show.
Yeah, thank you.
That's all we have for this week. You have been listening to People's Republic with Brianna Griffith. People's Republic originates in Austin, Texas, and is also available as a podcast on Spotify, Spreaker, Stitcher, iTunes, or wherever podcasts are podded. You can also find us on Facebook and Twitter at People's Radio ATX for more news and analysis. We are out of here.